everybody, what's going on? Coach William Grazione here with Metabolic Evolution Incorporated, and in today's video we actually are bringing you guys an interview. So while I was out in Las Vegas for the 2018 Mr. Natural Olympia, I stayed with my friend, our assistant coach of Metabolic Evolution, Zoey Panzarino, and was able to sit down with her for an interview and just ask her thoughts on the differences between reverse dieting and recovery dieting. Now, Zoe's somebody who has competed in roughly about 13 shows in her competition prep career, about half of those shows being very high-level NPC national shows. And she has utilized both a reverse diet and a recovery diet after a show. So I thought, who better to interview than our assistant coach, Zoey Panzarino, as, you know, obviously she has a lot of experience and she's also stepping in to being a big role for Metabolic Evolution. And I thought that you guys, because a lot of you are probably going to be competing, whether or not it's towards the end of this year, 2018, or going into next year, 2019, many of you will be competing. And I know that some of you are still utilizing a slow reverse diet approach after a show. So if anything, all we want to do is provide some more awareness and some more education in regards to some protocols that may be extremely beneficial for you if you're going to be stepping on stage at NPC Nationals, or if you plan on competing at any point in time in the near future. So without further ado, guys, here's the interview where I sat down with Coach Zoey in her home in Las Vegas, Nevada, and just asked her a few questions in regards to her experiences with both reverse dieting and recovery dieting. Enjoy the video. What's going on, everybody? Coach William Grazione here with Metabolic Evolution Incorporated, and I'm here with
Coach Zoey. What's up, guys?
So, I basically just wanted to do this video on the whim because Zoey has experience doing both a recovery diet and a reverse diet.
Yep.
So Zoey's been working with me for how long? Like 3.5 years?
Yeah.
3.5 years so far. So we've gone through, this will be the 13th show in 3.5 years. And she's experienced a lot of things. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and start firing off some questions to her because we're basically talking about the differences between reverse dieting and recovery dieting immediately post-show. And who better to answer these questions than somebody who has real life in-field experience.
Yep.
So when we first started working together and we were implementing a strategically planned reverse diet, like it was adding 10 carbs, adding 10 carbs here, adding 10 carbs here. How did you feel as your metabolism started to improve and you were left still kind of eating in a calorie deficit for a prolonged period of time?
Well, for one, the first time that we implemented a reverse diet was after my first ever competition season. And I, like many other competitors, got done with my season and didn't binge eat, but I definitely had this Wonder Woman mentality of like, I deserve all this food, I need the treats and I need these things, and you know, enjoyed myself after the show and had the celebratory meals and such. And
which is very common for a lot of first-time physique athletes.
Which is, yes, and maybe overdid it at times, but
I think we've all overdone it at least once.
yes. So going from that to a reverse diet where essentially we started with very low calories again and just brought them back up slowly.
Right.
It was pretty hard to stick to.
Now, would you say that your reverse, because after the show, when you started to re-implement calories and your metabolism started to improve, so it started to burn more, but as it's improving, you're not eating enough to keep you at maintenance or in a surplus, so you're actually consistently in a deficit.
You're consistently hangry.
So would you say that you're hungrier, or it was harder to adhere to the reverse than it was to the competition prep?
1000%. I always say that. It's a lot harder. And it's also harder with the fact of when you're in competition prep, you're always X weeks out. You always have a deadline. You're like 5 weeks out in the peak week. When you're in a reverse diet, that definitive deadline is out the window. So it's just like you're sticking to something just to stick to it. And if you don't have that self-discipline, it can be extremely hard to adhere to.
So as an athlete with a show coming up, you understand that the show is the goal, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the Super Bowl, and I just have to do whatever I have to do to get to that thing.
Yeah.
But then once that thing is over with, then what's actually keeping us accountable?
Yeah. It's like you had that continuous motivational, tangible thing, and now it's just okay, I'm just reversing to reverse with no end in sight.
Now, other than the adherence perspective, because there's a lot of different loopholes that we can go down and actually talk about this.
Yeah.
In regards to your performance, how did you feel your performance was right after your first show when we were implementing a slow reverse diet?
Obviously, after all the post-show treats, after your season and stuff, your
glucose,
training is
ready to
the
go.
pumps are crazy. Your training's awesome. You have all this like sugar and glucose built up that you're just ready to burn through. And then once that wears off and you're implementing the reverse diet, it's obviously better training than when you were during the depletion phase, but it definitely takes time to ramp strength back up to where it was maybe before you were in a deficit.
Now, would you say in comparison, and obviously we haven't gotten to the comparison part yet, but would you say with a recovery approach, the fact that you're eating more calories straight out of the gate, your strength improves faster?
Yes.
Okay. So we've talked about the adherence perspective. We talked about the training perspective. Now let's talk about the physical perspective. So I guess more about how you felt having to increase so slowly versus increasing faster with a recovery approach.
So everything else aside, if you're adhering 100% to your reverse diet, the way that I did it and you should do, you're essentially going to gain weight at a slower rate because you're increasing calories at a slower rate.
For a longer period of time.
So it's not that I want to hang on to that level of stage lean, but maintaining that athletic level of leanness longer does help keep the motivation alive.
Sure. Okay.
Because you didn't just blow up post-show, you know, like you're
Right.
following a plan, you're still maintaining everything that you worked so hard for, but
yeah, so I think another thing that we should talk about is actually the physiological side of, you know, maybe the differences between implementing a very slow reverse diet versus a recovery approach. So if you're implementing calories at an extremely slow pace, so maybe you're saying let's add a couple grams of fat here and there, let's add maybe 10 to 15 grams of carbs here and there, which is for most people very, very slow.
yes.
It's slower than their metabolism is capable of recovering, right? So therefore, if you're constantly in a calorie deficit, and we understand what happens when our bodies are constantly in calorie deficits, is that oftentimes we have metabolic adaptations, right? So all of the hormones that are associated with a surplus of calories stay lower, strength stays lower, our ability to be more cognitively aware is not back yet. And there's a lot of different physiological, I guess you'd say, down regulations that occur when you do a very slow, methodically increased amount of calories every single week, or every other week, depending on the implementation of your reverse diet that maybe your coach is having you do. So the ability for you to actually recover hormonally, metabolically, physically, mentally, all of that in most cases is a lot slower utilizing a standardized reverse diet, or what we define as a reverse diet. So I know that we didn't even talk about this, but let's go ahead and define what a reverse diet is after a competition specifically.
Okay.
So the way that I see it, and because this is just something that we, a lot of coaches back when I first started, we were implementing this a lot, was, every single week or every other week, or depending on how the athlete responded, we would add between 2 and 5 grams of fat and maybe 5 and 15 grams of carbs. Okay?
Very slow.
Extremely slow. And again, I think the biggest take-home factor here is that everybody would say how much harder the reverse was than the actual competition prep itself, right? So let's go ahead and jump on the other side of the fence, and let's go ahead and talk about your recovery diet that you've implemented previously.
Okay.
So with regards to the recovery diet, you want to go ahead and define, I guess, kind of what the recovery consists of?
So
what's the approach?
Essentially, in a recovery diet, you are increasing your calories initially right up to whatever perceived maintenance would be at that time. So rather than starting at your lowest point in your caloric deficit and increasing by small amounts of carbs and fats, you're jumping your total calories up to whatever your perceived maintenance is for your body at that specific moment.
Right.
Some of the benefits is that, your training is going to be improved significantly right off the bat because
oh my God, yeah, your strength
you're
is gonna be
fueling your
amazing.
body
Yeah.
with what it needs to perform in the gym. Your hunger levels are actually going to level out, so you don't have this uncontrollable sense of hunger that you want to eat the entire world because your calories are substantially higher. Personally, for me, I will say I notice a difference in my mood and my hormones and just my overall outlook on things. I mean, I all know if you've dieted before or been through a competition prep, it definitely can take a toll on you, and there's times where you get in that zombie mode or any sluggish feeling, but you have an increased sense of energy, your mood, your outlook, it all is increased.
Discussion the other day with my friend Alberto, and I'm going to ask you the same question.
Okay.
How many weeks would you say after we implemented the recovery did you actually start to feel normal? Pretty quick.
Yeah.
How many weeks would you say, like, to where you're like, I'm still, like, you're still super lean, like, you're still stage ready.
Yeah.
Even now, you're still stage ready, but, like, how long after the implementation of those calories were you like, I don't really feel like I'm dieting anymore?
Honestly, maybe like 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks?
So Alberto said 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
But obviously he gets insanely shredded.
Yeah. It all depends too, like how low your calories were before you implemented this.
This is true. Yeah, I mean that's all relative to the individual, right? So in most cases, though, during like stages of depletion, I mean you probably got to get down to like 50% of what like your max off season is.
Yeah.
So sometimes even more.
Yes.
You know. So just food for thought there, guys. That a recovery diet, at least defined to be a increase to perceived maintenance, as you so very well eloquently stated, that has been, in my opinion, the biggest game changer for so many of my athletes. The reason that I say this is because I no longer have to worry about individuals going off the rails after a show.
Yep.
I can tell you right now that from an adherence perspective, when I was implementing a reverse diet, we had so many athletes that they would just tell me, like, Coach, man, I understand what you're doing here. Like, I understand. But I just can't follow this. I can't follow it anymore. Like, can I do something else?
Yeah.
And at the time, we really didn't have an approach that we were utilizing that could solve this problem. And in 2013, 2014, when I actually started to read more about this and we started to implement it within our athletes, that problem was solved. And I can tell you guys right now that probably about 80% of the athletes that were following a very slow reverse diet would fail on it.
Yeah.
Whereas now we have about, I'd say about a 90 to even higher success rate with a recovery diet approach.
Oh, absolutely. I will say from my own personal experience, in my off season, I maintained a much more athletic, lean physique following a recovery diet than I did a reverse diet. Because I was able to actually adhere to the plan 100% for a much longer period of time and reap the benefits of optimizing my metabolism.
Yeah, so if we think about like what actually sabotages people, it's typically the hunger signals.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I believe some research, Eric Helms put out some research, I believe, in there. It basically stated that with the re-implementation of glucose and the re-implementation of carbohydrates, roughly after 72 hours, leptin and T3 were actually re-elevated close to what they were before the drastics, I guess the severity of the caloric restriction.
Yeah.
Right? So if after 3 days, the hunger hormones that are associated with the feeling of being, quote unquote, hangry, if those things are down regulated, then what's stopping you from not being able to adhere to your diet?
Exactly.
In theory, you should be eating more food, you should still be relatively close to stage lean, and you should be performing so much better in the gym. Not to mention that with the re-implementation of calories, all of the negative physiological processes that occur within your body during a time of caloric restriction, they become reversed in the opposite direction.
Yep.
So now we can actually start to improve your health going into possibly your off season or going into another potential show.
I don't know how real you want to get in this, but I mean, specifically talking about female.
So like you were saying, Zoe, you're talking about going a bit into specifics here. So this does obviously just directly go to you females out there, because obviously we want to provide you guys some helpful information too post-show. Now, it's very, very common for most females who are not athletically lean year-round to lose their cycle at about 12 to 13% body fat.
Yep.
Very, very common. There are females out there who are, I would consider them the outliers, who can live around 12, 13% body fat year-round.
Yep.
And they consistently have their cycle. So with application to physique athletes and how a reverse versus a recovery can actually impact your menstruation cycle, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that and maybe the differences that you saw.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why you lose your menstrual cycle in the first place is because your calories are getting low, your body fat in turn is becoming less, and your body is basically saying that I can only keep you in survival mode, right? It's not in a prime place for you to reproduce, which is essentially why you have your menstrual cycle in the first place.
Yeah, the menstruation cycle is very calorically expensive.
Yes.
And the hormone responsible for delivering the pulses to deliver your cycle is the luteinizing hormone. Now with low calories, luteinizing hormone becomes downregulated.
Yep.
So therefore now you don't have the energy available to be able to produce a strong menstruation cycle.
Exactly. So once implementing a recovery diet and you're increasing calories significantly, you're all of a sudden but your body is basically running on more. So it has the availability to essentially turn those hormones back on.
Absolutely.
And allow for your menstrual cycle to return because your body is able to burn those calories.
Yeah, and the research about that actually clearly states that roughly 72 hours at caloric maintenance, even after a prolonged period of a caloric deficit, is actually enough to help jumpstart the recovery of all of those processes. So 72 hours, only 3 days eating at maintenance. Now again, eating way above maintenance is not overly helpful.
Yeah.
Eating at maintenance is enough to actually reverse those negative processes.
Yes. So essentially, if you're a competitor and you're implementing a recovery diet, the likelihood of your menstrual cycle returning would be quicker through this recovery process than it would a reverse diet, because essentially your body is still in a deficit of calories with a reverse diet for an extended period of time versus recovery.
And through my own experience as a practitioner, what I've noticed is that back then when I was working with females, sometimes it'd take them 3, 4, 5 months to actually get their cycle back.
Yeah.
Whereas now with the implementation of a recovery diet, again resetting calories back to theoretical maintenance, what I see is that most of them have their cycle back within a few months.
Yeah. I've had clients that I implement a recovery diet and within that first month,
Back.
right back on
Like
it.
magic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, cool. Well, this has been an awesome conversation about recovery versus reverse dieting. For those of you who are interested in maybe some research about this, because I know there's not any available right now, but one of our assistant coaches, James Longstrom, who is a master's student over at the University of South Florida, who works directly under Dr. Bill Campbell, is actually conducting the very first research study on reverse versus recovery dieting. So we will actually have tangible data that you guys can take a look at and review so that you guys can obviously have some guidelines in regards to how you want to plan your approach after your next competition or your next client's competition. So Coach Zoe, thank you so much for allowing me to interview you. I thought this video went phenomenal. Hopefully you guys did too. And we will see you in the next one. See ya.
Bye, guys.